Although she is one of the most recognizable faces of the 1920s, Louise Brooks' name might go unnoticed by many people today. She starred in 24 films and made it out of 2 decades of self-induced obscurity to write some of the most highly acclaimed essays on film in Hollywood in the 20th century. Her signature black bob and flapper style made her approachable yet, somehow, mysterious to audiences, and her later work with G.W. Pabst drastically changed the way that actors approached their craft. Louise Brooks was born on November 14, 1906, to a lawyer father, Leonard Porter Brooks, and artist mother, Myra Rood. Her childhood in Cherryvale, Kansas was definitely not the picture of ideal bliss. Mr. Brooks spent much of his time working, while Mrs. Brooks felt that her children should be able to fend for themselves. Because of this, Louise spent little time getting emotional or physical support from her family, although she did develop a love for art and music through watching her mother. This love led Brooks to join a dancing troupe in 1922. She moved on to become a chorus girl for George White's Scandals, and followed that appearance with a featured dancing part in Ziegfeld Follies. Through these appearances, she came to the attention of a producer for Paramount, who signed her by 1925, as well as Charlie Chaplin, with whom she had an affair that summer. While her first film was an uncredited role in the film The Streets of Forgotten Men, Louise Brooks introduced herself to audiences in 1926, The American Venus. Her role was small in the film, but many newspaper and media critics singled out her performance. The acclaim was enough to land her a starring role in The Social Celebrity, also out that year. Brooks starred in 6 films in 1926 alone, following that with 4 films in 1927. Her boldest career move came after filming 1929's Beggars of Life. Paramount refused to give her the raise they had promised her, so she refused to work for them. The studio attempted to pressure Brooks to stay by dangling the coming of sound cinema over her head, but she was not swayed or frightened by her uncertain future. Instead, she moved to Germany to star in what would become her most legendary film, Pandora's Box. This movie is famous for several reasons. It featured one of the first lesbian characters on film, and it introduced a new sexual approach to acting. Brooks' femme fatale trend continued with 2 other Pabst movies, Diary of a Lost Girl and Pre-Debut. Unfortunately, upon returning to Hollywood, Paramount wanted nothing to do with her, and she remained shunned from the major picture studios. She appeared in several B movies and continued her path down the Hollywood star ladder until her last movie, John Wayne's Overland Stage Raiders. After her retirement from film, Brooks attempted to redefine herself. She tried to open a dance studio, wrote some reviews and articles for magazines, and even worked as a call girl for several years. None of these career paths made Brooks happy, and her heavy drinking and mindless spending sent her life reeling in an unfortunate direction. Luck, however, brought her out from obscurity. With the mid-1950s came a fascination with Brooks' films. French film historians called her work better than even Greta Garbo's or Marlene Dietrich's. Film festivals, cinema studies, and general cultural awareness focused on Louise Brooks, and a film critic, James Card, found the struggling former actress living in New York. With the new attention, Brooks took the opportunity to redefine herself. She began publishing witty and insightful essays on the film industry. Her book, Lulu in Hollywood, was published and released to critical acclaim. Still today, lovers of film look to Brooks to define 20s and 30s glam. She has and will remain one of the most interesting screen icons of the 20th century. Erich von Stroheim was born in Vienna, Austria. His parents were practicing Jews who arrived in Ellis Island in 1909. He started out with bit parts in films by such notables as D.W. Griffith and Intolerance. He spoke very little of his native German and, as a result, would have to remember his lines piece by piece. He was working in Hollywood in 1914 before becoming an assistant director on Intolerance with Griffith, as an actor receiving small roles, and as a consultant on set for German culture. He was almost typecast at the time as a snappy German character. He played a mean-spirited German 3 times in a short period. After World War I, he moved on from acting to writing, and by the time of Blind Husbands in 1919, he was ready to write and direct his own films. He was known throughout Hollywood to be a demanding and argumentative director, acting more like a dictator than a director. By the early 1920s, he was making big studio films. Stroheim was even rumored to be the director on the first million-dollar movie, Foolish Wives. Stroheim's most famous work was undoubtedly Greed, which is an adaptation of the novel McTeague. After an original 10-hour version, it was scaled down to 6, and finally to a 4-hour version to be shown over 2 nights. This was again rejected by the studio, and MGM took the film out of Stroheim's control and gave it to June Mathis, head screenwriter, who reduced it to 2.5 hours. This loss of film is considered by many to be one of the greatest losses in the history of American film. After having his hard work taken away, Stroheim disowned the movie and held a grudge against Mathis, holding her responsible. It was reconstructed loosely in 1999 by Rick Schmidlin, combining original footage with still photographs and editing them together. As time went on, after Intolerance, it became harder and harder for him to receive directing offers. Joseph Kennedy fired him over discrepancies over the budget on the set of Queen Kelly. After a few years, he became unable to work as a director and started taking acting jobs, including a semi-autobiographical role in Sunset Boulevard as a washed-up Hollywood man who suffered a lot of humiliation. Toward the end of his life, he moved to France, where his silent film work was deeply admired by French cinema experts, along with having several novels published in French and working on unrealized film projects. His death was a tragic loss for the world of film. His contributions to his medium are unparalleled, and he is widely viewed as one of the most important and influential directors of his day.
Charlie Chaplin was an English comic actor, film director, and composer, best known for his work during the silent film era. He became the most famous film star in the world between the end of World War I. He was born on April 16, 1889, in the Poor District of London. He died on December 25, 1977, in his sleep. His mother, though in and out of mental hospitals, was a successful singer. His father was a successful actor until he started drinking. His education was at Lambeth Workhouse. He left school barely able to read and write and joined a group of clog dancers. Chaplin arrived in the United States in 1910 and was chosen by Mack Sennett to be in a Keystone Films silent comedy series. During this time, Chaplin created the role of the tramp. After making 30 short movies with Sennett, Chaplin was getting exhausted. He left to work at the Esnay Studios to make The Tramp. In 1918, he signed a $1 million contract with National Films. After signing with the National Films, Chaplin was in A Dog's Life, Shoulder Arms, and The Kid. In 1923, Chaplin joined with 3 other entertainers to make the United Artists. Their goal was to make high-quality, feature-length films. During this time, Chaplin starred in A Woman in Paris, The Gold Rush, and The Circus. All 3 of these were considered by critics to be his funniest films. Chaplin won an Academy Award in 1929 for his work in The Circus. Before the Great Depression hit, Charlie Chaplin was considered to be the best actor of the 1920s. As they said in the book The Century by Peter Jennings and Todd Brewster, teenagers from Maine to California looked to the movies to see the latest fashions and hear hit songs. Charlie Chaplin was the biggest star. City Lights was considered by critics to be some of Chaplin's best work. Modern Times and The Great Dictator about Adolf Hitler were some of Chaplin's early 1930s films. Monsieur Verdox was about its time. It showed Chaplin as a director and writer. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Chaplin's political perspective on right-wing dictatorship was not accepted by the public. His personal life was rough at the same time, and critics considered his art to be bitter. From 1947 to 1952, Chaplin devoted a great deal of his time to Limelight, an autobiography. While on vacation in 1952, Chaplin was told by the United States Attorney General that his re-entry would be challenged. Chaplin had never become a United States citizen, so he sold all of his American possessions and moved to Geneva, Switzerland with his family. In 1964, Chaplin published My Autobiography, a book with many self-apologies. In 1967, Chaplin made one of his last movies, A Countess from Hong Kong, considered by critics to be a disaster. By 1972, times had changed and Chaplin was back in the United States. He was honored in tributes in Hollywood and New York City, one of which included winning an Academy Award. In 1975, he became Sir Charles Chaplin after being knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. I felt that Charlie Chaplin is one of the most interesting people I've learned about. He came from rags and bad parenting to become an actor trying to make a living, and finally to become a famous person everybody knows and loves. Like everything, his life had a downshift. Although he made some tough decisions and some heartbreaks, he wrote it out to once again aspire in his work. Charlie Chaplin had a great impact upon the 20th century. From his films to his writing and to his directing, or sometimes all three at once, Chaplin changed them all. He was also not afraid to show what he believed in, no matter what the consequences. In fact, he had such an impact that in 1992 a movie was made about him, coincidentally called Chaplin.